My landlady showed me the vacant apartment, then whispered, "Would you mind sharing it with me?" My landlady handed me the keys to her vacant loft, then whispered, "They're taking my building." Part 1. The laser dot trembled against the exposed brick wall, and for the first time all afternoon, it was not because of my hand. It was because the woman holding the keys behind me was shaking. The renovated loft stood high above the city, empty except for sunlight, dust, and the clean geometry of a space waiting to become useful. 14-foot ceilings, original masonry, unfinished hardwood, tall industrial windows overlooking a skyline that had changed too quickly and remembered too little. It was exactly the kind of office I'd been searching for. I lowered the laser measure and turned. Elena Morgan stood by the heavy oak entryway door, holding a set of antique brass keys that trembled faintly in her hand. She wore a beige blazer over a simple cream blouse and tailored brown trousers, professional enough for a lease tour, but her eyes kept moving toward the hallway as if someone might arrive before she finished explaining why I was really there. "You said the whole floor was available," I said. "It is." Her voice stayed composed, but the keys gave her away, for now. That was the first warning. I was Caleb Parker, founder of Parker Urban Planning, and my work had taught me to distrust phrases like "for now." In municipal code, zoning meetings, and development contracts, danger rarely arrived as a shout. It arrived as a clause, a deadline, or a smiling representative with a folder thick enough to ruin someone's life. Elena stepped farther into the loft and placed the keys on the deep stone windowsill. They landed with a sharp brass clink. "I need a commercial tenant on this floor by 5 o'clock, she said. "A valid business name on a master lease, filed with the city before close of business." I looked around the space again. "Why today?" Her lips pressed together once. "My grandfather owned this building for 40 years. When he died, he left it to me. I thought it was free and clear." She pulled a folded document from the leather folder under her arm. Then I found out he had taken a mezzanine loan against the property to pay for my mother's care before she passed. I took the document only after she offered it. The first page carried the logo of Vanguard Holdings. That name turned the sunlight cold. Vanguard was not a neighborhood lender. It was a corporate acquisition machine. They bought distressed notes, waited for technical default, then stripped buildings out from under owners who had more history than legal firepower. Elena continued before I had to ask, "The loan has a vacancy clause. If commercial occupancy drops below 80% for more than 30 consecutive days, Vanguard can force a buyout at the building's 1990 valuation. At a fraction of current value?" "Yes. And your previous anchor tenant moved out 30 days ago." Her hand closed around the edge of the folder. "This morning is the 30th day," she said. "If I do not file a valid lease today, they start default proceedings. I lose the building my family kept alive for 2 generations. There were the stakes, clear and brutal. Elena was here because the building was seconds away from falling into a lease trap. Vanguard wanted to trigger a hostile buyout, take the historic property cheap, and redevelop it into another luxury project. I was involved because I needed a real commercial office for my independent planning firm, and because I understood the municipal code well enough to know when paperwork was being used as a weapon." A sound came from the hallway. "Heavy shoes?" Measured steps. Elena turned toward the door. A man in a navy suit entered without knocking, followed by a younger associate carrying a leather binder. His smile was smooth enough to be practiced and thin enough to be dangerous. "Ms. Morgan," he said, "I hope we are not interrupting anything important." Elena's shoulders locked. "Richard?" The man's eyes moved to me, then away, dismissing me as part of the furniture. "Richard Vance," and he said, "Senior Acquisitions Director, Vanguard Holdings." "I know who you are," I said. That made him look back. Richard took a thick packet from his associate and held it toward Elena. "It is 4:30, he said. "The vacancy period has expired in practical terms. Vanguard is prepared to offer a clean transfer agreement today. Sign now, and we will waive several penalty fees." He held out a gold pen. Elena stared at it. The keys on the windowsill had stopped moving, but her breathing had not. "May I see the notice?" I asked. Richard smiled without warmth. And you are? Caleb Parker, principal planner and founder of Parker Urban Planning. His expression shifted by one quiet inch. Not fear. Recalculation. I took the document from the associate and read quickly. The pressure language was aggressive, but not unusual. The legal citations were meant to exhaust a civilian before they reached the only paragraph that mattered. There. Municipal Code 402. Commercial vacancy default. I turned one page back, then forward again. Richard waited with the confidence of a man who had watched this script work too many times. This notice is premature, I said. His smile vanished. The vacancy clock has run, he replied. Not under this overlay. I held up the packet. This parcel sits inside a mixed-use historical preservation district under Section 8, Clause 4. A vacancy trigger enforcement period is paused when a prospective commercial tenant files a preliminary structural and occupancy audit with the Municipal Planning Office. Elena looked at me. I kept my eyes on Richard. I filed that audit at 8:07 this morning before I came here. I needed confirmation of load-bearing capacity, floor area ratio, and server equipment allowance before signing any lease. Richard's jaw tightened. That grants 72 hours at most. Correct, I said, more than enough time to finalize and file a commercial master lease. This is a stall tactic. No. This is municipal compliance. If Vanguard attempts to enforce default while a registered city audit is active, you expose the company to a tortious interference claim and a preservation board injunction. The associate looked down at the binder. Richard noticed. So did I. After a long silence, Richard took the packet back. Enjoy your technicality, he said to Elena. We will return with something less fragile. He turned and walked out. The heavy oak door closed behind him. For several seconds, neither of us moved. Then Elena pressed one palm flat against the stone windowsill. The brass keys lay beside her hand, still and cold in the late afternoon light. You filed the audit this morning? She asked. Yes. Before you knew about Vanguard? Before I sign any lease, I verify the building. A small breath left her. Not quite a laugh. Not quite relief. You just stopped them with a form. Forms are underrated. This time, she did laugh. Once, softly, like she had forgotten the sound and found it again by accident. I stepped back, giving her space. I need to be clear. I said, I do want the loft. My firm needs a permanent office, but I will not sign anything if you feel pressured by what just happened. She looked at the empty floor, the windows, the keys, then back at me. Pressure is what he brought into this room, she said. You brought time. That is all I can offer today. Today, that is everything. We spent the next 3 hours at the kitchen island with laptops, printed city forms, and the lease document spread between us. I read every clause aloud. Elena corrected the tenant access schedule and insisted on a provision protecting the residential tenants upstairs from construction noise. That mattered. It told me she was not only fighting for the building as an asset, she was protecting the people inside it. At 7:42, we filed the shared commercial lease electronically. At 7:58, the city confirmation came through. Valid receipt, commercial occupancy filing accepted. Elena stared at the screen. Then she reached for the brass keys and slid one across the island to me. Temporary tenant key, she said. I did not pick it up immediately. Only if you are sure. I'm sure. The key was heavier than it looked. Part 2. On Monday morning, I moved in with 3 monitors, 2 drafting tables, a cabinet of rolled maps, and an old steel coffee maker that had survived 3 apartments and 1 failed corporate career. Elena arrived an hour later with a vintage oak desk and 2 boxes of building records. Frank, the building superintendent, carried one of the boxes under one arm and eyed me like a man who had survived enough contractors to trust none of them. You the planner? He asked. Yes. You gonna knock down walls? No. Good, he said. I like these walls. So do I. Frank studied me for another second, then nodded once. Maybe you'll do. Elena smiled behind her box. The loft began changing by inches. My monitors faced the brick wall so their light would not cut across her desk. Elena placed her oak desk near the western windows, where she could manage tenant accounts and maintenance requests while still watching the hallway. I taped a shared hour schedule to the side of the kitchen island: client calls, city records visits, quiet work blocks, inspection windows. Elena stood in front of the schedule with a mug of coffee in her hand. You made a chart for when we use the kettle. I made a chart for sound, visitors, confidential calls, and shared equipment. The kettle has its own line. It whistles. Her mouth curved. You are a very serious man, Caleb. I have been accused of worse. I'm not accusing. She took a pen from my drafting table and added one line under 2 o'clock. Green tea, Elena. Then she handed the pen back. Now it is official. That became our first domestic rhythm. Not romance. Not yet. Coffee in the morning. Green tea at 2. Files on the island. Respectful distance. A quiet loft slowly learning both our names. The 72-hour city audit bought us time, but not safety. By week 2, Vanguard began calling Elena's residential tenants. They asked whether the building was financially unstable. One elderly tenant from the 3rd floor came downstairs with a rent check in her hand and fear in her eyes. Elena, Mrs. Alvarez said, "Are we going to be forced out?" Elena's face did not break. She invited Mrs. Alvarez into the loft, made tea, and sat across from her at the island. "No," Elena said, "your lease is valid. Your rent stays the same. If anyone from Vanguard contacts you again, send them to me and Frank." Mrs. Alvarez looked at me. "And him?" Elena glanced at me. "Caleb is helping with the city filings." I opened a folder and placed a printed tenant rights notice on the table. "This explains your protections in plain language," I said. "Frank will put copies under every tenant's door tonight." Mrs. Alvarez touched the paper as if it were a railing. "Thank you," she said. After she left, Elena stood at the window for a long moment. "Richard is trying to scare them," she said. "Yes, I hate that it is working." I uncapped a marker and wrote tenant notice packet on the whiteboard. "Then we answer fear with documents." She turned. "That is very you." "It works." Her shoulders eased a fraction. "Good," she said. "Then give me a stack." That was the first time I watched her fight back, not with panic, but with process. The tenant notices worked. By Friday, Mrs. Alvarez had asked for extra copies for the 3rd floor. Frank had collected old rent receipts in a battered milk crate, and Elena had stopped answering fear with apologies. She answered it with paper. One afternoon, I returned from the records office and found a label taped to my old steel coffee maker. "Architectural fuel unit, do not remove." Under it, Elena had written, "Possibly older than the building." I added a second label to the electric kettle. "Green tea compliance device." She found it at 2:05 and laughed hard enough that Frank looked in from the hallway. "Something broken?" he asked. "No," Elena said, still smiling. For once. That relief mattered because the next blow came 2 days later. Part 3. By week 4, Richard returned with his second angle. I was at City Hall pulling archived land surveys when Elena called. "Caleb," she said. Her voice was tight enough to cut through the noise behind me. "Richard is here. He brought a city inspector." I closed the archive drawer. "Do not let them into the utility closet. Do not sign anything. Put me on speaker." I already did. A pause. Then Richard's voice came through my phone. "How efficient." "I'll be there in 10 minutes, I said. I made it in 8. When I reached the loft, Richard stood near the kitchen island with a folded easement map spread in front of him. A city inspector beside him looked uncomfortable, which meant Richard had probably dragged him here with a half-true citation. Elena stood near her desk, one hand resting on a stack of tenant ledgers. Not hiding. Not cornered this time. Waiting. Richard tapped the map. "A 1972 municipal easement designates this eastern wall as a protected utility corridor," he said. "If the easement remains active, the commercial renovation is invalid. The occupancy filing collapses, and Ms. Morgan's lease protection disappears." The inspector cleared his throat. If active, the issue would require vacancy pending review. Elena's fingers pressed into the ledger spine. There was the real threat. 14 days to vacate. Lease invalidated. Vacancy clause triggered again. Vanguard did not need the building to be unsafe. They only needed it to appear legally unusable long enough to force default. I stepped to the map. May I? The inspector handed me the citation. October 12th, 1972. Subterranean Aqueduct Expansion Initiative. I almost smiled. Almost. This easement is dead, I said. Richard's eyes narrowed. The city seal suggests otherwise. The seal is real. The project is not. I turned to the inspector. In 1998, the Urban Revitalization Act nullified abandoned utility easements in this grid after the subway expansion rerouted the corridor south. Non-use plus statutory abandonment reverted the corridor rights to the property owner. The inspector opened his tablet. Richard watched him. So did Elena. The room held its breath until the inspector exhaled. He is correct, the inspector said. Section 14, paragraph C, easement cleared. Occupancy permit remains valid. The keys on Elena's desk gave a tiny metallic click as her hand relaxed beside them. Richard folded the map too sharply. You are becoming expensive, Mr. Parker. Then stop bringing cheap arguments. His face hardened. You cannot code your way out of money. Vanguard still holds a minority deed interest through the loan. We can petition for partition. I know. Then you know this ends at the zoning board. I met his eyes. Yes, I said, it does. After Richard left, Elena sat slowly at her desk. For a moment, she only looked at the ledgers. I stayed by the island, 3 full steps away. Her hand moved to the edge of the closest book. She opened it, closed it, then opened it again as if the numbers might rearrange themselves into safety. I thought he had found something real, she said. He found something old, not the same thing. A faint smile touched her mouth, then disappeared. What happens now? I placed a black ledger on the island. We stop reacting. Vanguard's minority share gives them a path to request partition. We buy out that share before the hearing. She looked up sharply. I do not have that kind of capital. I do. Her chair made a small sound against the floor. Caleb! I opened the ledger. For 7 years, I have been saving a commercial property fund for my firm. The plan was to buy a small office in the financial district, but this building is a better investment. It is not just an investment to me. I know. Then you understand why I cannot let you throw your future into my emergency. I turned the ledger toward her. Verified appraisal, proposed escrow letter, fair market buyout range, projected rental income, preservation tax credits, tenant stability, commercial use projections. I tapped each section. This is not a rescue. It is a structured investment. Parker Urban Planning buys Vanguard's minority position through escrow. You keep majority ownership of the building. We create a joint trust only for the commercial floor and shared improvements. Your residential ownership remains yours. She read the first page, then the second. Her breathing slowed because the numbers gave her something stronger than reassurance. They gave her choice. You already built this? I built the first version before I signed the lease. Why? Because Richard said he would return with another approach. A quiet settled between us. The city moved beyond the windows, bright and careless. Elena closed the ledger. If we do this, she said, everything is written down. No blurred lines, no favors, no emotional debt. Agreed. And if the board approves the buyout, you become my business partner in the commercial level only. Yes. She held my gaze. And nothing else is assumed. Nothing. Only then did she nod. Then let's beat them properly. The loft became a war room. Frank brought up old maintenance records from the basement. Marcus, a city records clerk who had helped me on past preservation projects, found the missing 1998 council minutes that proved the easement reversal. Mrs. Alvarez organized tenant letters stating they wanted the building preserved under Elena's management. Every subplot tightened into the main case. Tenants. Records. Capital. History. By week 5, Richard tried a softer weapon. He sent Elena a private settlement offer. The email arrived at 10:11 p.m., while rain tapped the windows and the city lights blurred beyond the glass. Elena opened it at the island. I saw the way her shoulders went still. "Do not answer yet," I said. She slid the laptop toward me. "Vanguard offered to let her keep a small cash payout, enough to relocate, enough to avoid legal fees, enough to make surrender sound responsible. In exchange, she would waive tenant claims, vacate the commercial floor, and publicly state that the sale was voluntary." At the bottom, Richard had added one sentence. "It would be unfortunate for your tenants to watch you lose everything in public." Elena stood so quickly the stool scraped the floor. "No." The word hit the brick wall and came back harder. "No," she repeated. "He does not get to use them against me." Frank, who had been fixing a hinge near the service door, looked up. "You all right?" Elena's hand curled once on the edge of the island. Then she reached for a yellow legal pad. "Frank, I need current maintenance requests by floor. Caleb, I need the tenant impact summary updated with every signed letter. If Richard wants to make them part of the fight, then they get represented in the packet." Frank grinned. "There she is," he said. I opened the model. "Elena." She looked at me. "This is a good decision." Her jaw was still tight, but her eyes were steady. "I know." Rain hit the windows harder. The loft did not feel fragile anymore. Part 4. By week 7, the kitchen island disappeared under binders, maps, escrow confirmations, tenant statements, zoning printouts, preservation studies, and coffee cups. At 2 every afternoon, I turned on the kettle. At 2:05, Elena placed a cup of green tea beside her ledger. At 2:10, Frank usually appeared with something useful and one complaint. "Found the 1986 boiler permits," he said one Wednesday, dropping a folder on the island. "Also found a rat the size of a sandwich." Elena looked up. "Did you handle it?" Frank shrugged. He looked busy. I let him pass. For the first time all day, Elena laughed hard enough to cover her mouth. The sound moved through the loft like sunlight finding a new window. The closer the zoning board hearing came, the more careful I became with boundaries. I reviewed escrow language only with our attorney present. Every investment document used professional terms, not emotional ones. When Elena worked late, I stayed only when she asked. One night, near midnight, I found her standing at the master calendar. Her name was written across the hearing date beside the words, "Zoning Board, Buyout Petition." She held the marker uncapped, but the tip had not touched the paper. "I keep thinking about my grandfather," she said. "He kept this building through recessions, fires in the alley, broken boilers. I might lose it in a boardroom with fluorescent lights." I stopped beside her, close enough to read the date, far enough that the choice remained hers. "The packet is complete," I said. "The funds are verified. The appraisal meets the fair market threshold. The tenant letters are signed. The easement reversal is certified." She capped the marker, then wrote one more line beneath the hearing date. "Bring the keys." "If the building survives," she said, "I want to carry the first thing he left me." "That is a good plan." A minute later, I pushed the final index toward her. "Your signature goes on the certification page," I said. "Not mine, yours." She read every line. The pen paused above the signature block only once. Then she signed. The next morning, the tenants left 27 folded paper cranes outside the loft door, one for each occupied unit, with a note from Mrs. Alvarez. For the board packet, if memory has supporting documents. Elena pressed the note between 2 plastic sheets and added it to the community impact section. "I am not crying," she said. I was assessing paper weight. She laughed through the breath she had been holding. That was the last relief before the hearing. The morning of the zoning board. The municipal building looked harder than usual. Gray stone. Glass doors. Security scanners. A hallway full of people carrying folders like shields. Richard sat outside the hearing room with 3 lawyers. He wore a dark suit and a tie the color of old blood. When he saw us, his gaze dropped to the brass keys in Elena's hand. He smiled. "Sentiment is not a legal argument, Ms. Morgan." Elena placed the keys in her coat pocket. "No," she said, "but ownership is—" We walked past him. Inside, The boardroom smelled like stale coffee and printer toner. Fluorescent lights flattened every face. A microphone waited at the center table. The chairman called the case at 9:20. Richard stood first. He spoke of highest and best use, tax efficiency, obsolete structures, redevelopment demand. He described Elena's preservation plan as sentimental and financially unstable. He claimed Vanguard only wanted to unlock the property's full urban potential. He did not mention the vacancy trap. He did not mention tenant calls. He did not mention the abandoned easement. He did not mention Richard Vance standing in the loft with a gold pen at 4:30 on the 30th day. Then it was our turn. I connected my tablet to the screen and projected the preservation model: rental stability, commercial occupancy, structural compliance, neighborhood impact, tax credits, and long-term municipal value. Vanguard's partition petition rests on the claim that the current ownership cannot stabilize or maximize the property. I said, "That claim is false." The board members opened our packets. Parker Urban Planning has placed verified funds in escrow to purchase Vanguard's minority interest at fair market value, using an independent appraisal. Under Municipal Code 812, majority owners of designated historical mixed-use properties retain right of first refusal when minority shares are offered or weaponized through partition. Richard stood, weaponized as inflammatory. The chairman looked at him. "Sit down, Mr. Vance." Richard sat. I continued with the numbers. Projected revenue. Tenant retention. Commercial occupancy. Preservation incentives. Then I stepped back from the microphone. The most important part was not mine. Elena stood. Her hand went once to her pocket, where the keys rested. Then she faced the board. "My grandfather did take a loan against this building," she said. "He did it to care for his daughter. Vanguard bought that paper and tried to turn his grief into my default. They pressured tenants, misused a vacancy clause, revived an abandoned easement, and filed for partition when those tactics failed." The room was silent. Elena placed the escrow confirmation on the podium. "I am not asking this board to protect me from business. I am asking it to enforce the law that protects historical buildings from predatory minority interest abuse. The funds are verified. The appraisal is fair. Vanguard can be paid today. Their control ends today." Mrs. Alvarez, sitting in the second row with Frank and the other tenants, lifted one folded paper crane and held it in both hands. Elena saw it. Her voice held. "This building is not empty land waiting for better men to imagine value. It is occupied. It is solvent. It is historically protected. And it is mine." The chairman reviewed the escrow letter. Then the appraisal. Then the statute. When he lifted the gavel, Richard's face had already changed. He knew. "The board recognizes the majority owner's right of first refusal," the chairman said. "Vanguard's partition petition is dismissed. The buyout may proceed through escrow immediately." The gavel struck. Elena did not collapse into relief. She stood still, one hand in her pocket, fingers wrapped around the keys. Then Frank started clapping. Mrs. Alvarez joined. The room followed, not loudly, not wildly, but firmly enough that Richard had to pack his leather binder to the sound of a building refusing to disappear. Part 5. Escrow closed at 3:46 that afternoon. Marcus sent confirmation first. Transfer recorded, Vanguard minority interest released. Frank printed the email downstairs and brought it up like a victory flag. "Frame this," he said, dropping it onto the island. Elena touched the paper with one finger. "Maybe I will. You should," Frank said, "put it near the boiler so it remembers what bravery looks like. The boiler has never been brave. It survives this building. That is bravery." I took off my coat and hung it over the back of a chair. For the first time in 8 weeks, there was no emergency document waiting for my signature. No deadline before 5. No threat letter. No inspector in the hallway. Only the loft, the city, and the late afternoon light cutting across the hardwood like the first day, softer now because we were no longer standing inside a countdown. The practical work was not over. Escrow records still had to be filed. tenant notices updated, and the commercial trust finalized for tax purposes. But the building was safe. Elena was safe. And none of it depended on a man with a gold pen. At 5, Frank returned with the final access list. "You both need to sign this," he said. "Then I can stop pretending I like paperwork." "You love paperwork," Elena said. "I love boilers. Paperwork is what keeps people from touching boilers." Elena signed first. Then I signed. Frank witnessed the signatures and tucked the list into his folder. He looked from her to me, then at the green tea compliance label still taped to the kettle. "You two gonna keep labeling appliances?" "Yes," Elena said. "No," I said at the same time. Frank grunted. "Good. Consistency is suspicious." He left before either of us could answer. The heavy oak door clicked shut. The loft became quiet. Not empty. Quiet. Elena picked up the antique brass keys from the stone windowsill and placed them in my palm. "This is not for the deed," she said. "Frank already filed the access list. This is not for the trust. That is signed." The brass was cool against my skin as she folded my fingers over the keys. "This is because I want you here tomorrow," she said. "As Caleb." I did not move closer. The choice had to remain hers all the way to the end. "Tomorrow morning," she said, "I am meeting the Historical Society Board. I want to introduce you as my business partner. And if you are willing, afterward, I want to have dinner with you as something more." Outside the windows, the city lights came on one by one. "I'm willing," I said, the keys pressed between our palms, and for the first time in years, I stopped measuring the exits. The next morning, the Historical Society Board arrived with notebooks and cameras. Elena met them at the door in the same beige blazer from the first day, but nothing about her trembled now. "This is Caleb Parker," she said, "principal planner of Parker Urban Planning and my business partner on the commercial restoration project." The title landed cleanly. Professional, accurate, earned. Then she looked at me. "And someone I trust?" After the tour, she walked with me to the roof and handed me a folded paper crane from Mrs. Alvarez. "For future documentation," she said. "Of what?" "That this building can hold more than emergencies." The city stretched around us in late morning light. Elena reached for my hand in open daylight on the roof of the building she had saved with law, records, tenants, and the stubborn courage to sign her own name. No crisis pushed her, no document required it, no money demanded it. She chose. That evening, before dinner, we returned to the loft and turned off the lights together. The brick walls settled into amber shadow. My monitors went dark. Her oak desk held the building ledger, the keys, and one paper crane. At the kitchen island, she tapped the label on the kettle. "This stays," I assumed. She took the brass keys from the island and held them out. "Lock up with me." I took the second key. Together, we stepped into the hallway and pulled the heavy oak door closed. The locks turned one after the other. 2 clicks. Clean. Certain? We walked toward the stairs together, the city waiting below, the building safe behind us, and the keys warm in her hand. The end.